I'm Scott Allen Miller. It's the 18th of July, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in Leon, Nicaragua, and today I've got a bunch going on, so filming is a little bit challenging. I've also got this dappled light going on my face. The sun's getting a little bit low and it is very bright. I am going to be heading out to Managua today. I had to spend the day working, and then I'm going out to Managua for filming purposes, so I'm going to be grabbing cool, interesting things there, but mostly tomorrow. Today I'm here all day and going out at night, but we're going to talk about all that. We're going to talk about the Vigilia, which I think I'm pronouncing right, the Vigil, which happens on the night of the 18th here in Nicaragua, and a little bit about that, but we're going to get to all that right after the bump. It is just too bright to be standing over there, so we're going to do the video from here today. So my day was very busy. I was just scrambling because it is middle of the week and I have a lot of work that needs to be done. It's a Tuesday, but I've been asked to go out and film at the 19th celebrations, which happen tomorrow. So for those who are not aware, especially for Americans, we're used to the 4th of July. Here in Nicaragua, the equivalent is the 19th of July, will be tomorrow. So that is a very big celebration here. The key difference is the United States is celebrating several hundred years since, I don't know, several, more than 200 years since it is independent, 247 to be exact, because I was born the year of the 200th anniversary, so I'm actually able to remember that fairly easily. So coming up in 3 years is going to be a really big deal when it's 250. But here in Nicaragua, things are much more recent. The country has only been independent and free, so their independence, right, is only 44 years old tomorrow. And so that means that there is a huge number of the population that were alive and remember, and not quite as many remember, but many do, prior to it being independent. And so imagine if you're from the United States, especially because like Canada is not actually completely independent yet, right? They still have the Queen, they're still part of the Crown. They're mostly independent, but it was a soft independence where they slowly eased their way out and have not yet completely eased their way out, right? So like Canada has not yet experienced the level of independence that the US had almost 250 years ago and Nicaragua had 44 years ago. So if you're coming from that world, you don't have this like really strong, like this is the day we separated feeling. But the United States has a very strong, like we declared independence, but it's done differently. It took years after the declaration before it was actually done, and the government reformed a while later. So even that was kind of soft because 1789 represents a lot of the current United States history, things like that. And but you can imagine in those first years after the revolution, the 4th of July celebrations must have been epic. Whether they actually held them on the 4th or not, I don't know for the first while. It took a little bit before they really honed in on that as the holiday. But those people who are like, we fought for this and now this is our country, I think you can picture just how excited they would be. You see how excited people are for the 4th of July now. And that independence was very soft because the United States, by and large, right? Of course, there are exceptions. There were people who were from New York, the New Netherlands colony. They had been conquered by England. So getting independence from England again was a big deal. They were re-freeing themselves to at least being part of a different group that had not been conquered. It was still a different association than they had started off with, but it was this important historical thing of regaining some semblance of say in the system rather than simply being a conquered colony by England. And of course, the indigenous Indian population had been mostly wiped out, and those that had not had been relocated, so they didn't have that sense of relief. They were like, yeah, we were not so happy with England, but we're not exactly happy with who's replacing it, so who cares, right? That was mostly, but for the most part, the majority of the population, or the people who at least were celebrating the 4th of July, for them, it wasn't this enormous victory. It was a big victory, but it wasn't the same magnitude of victory as a place that had been conquered, because this was, the majority of that population were colonists from England, or colonists who had moved to a colonial zone of England, had chosen that, and then said, you know what, we'd like to be independent of England. They're not really doing what we're looking for. We're not jamming on this, right? We're not jiving. So they had this big separation, and they were pretty excited to be separated. But that doesn't even come close to if you were an independent country, were conquered and occupied for a long time, and then finally overthrew an occupying force to actually be free again. All the colonists, yes, they were mostly children of people who had originally come, but they had all opted to be there. They had all been immigrants to the colony, almost all of them by choice. Obviously not the slave populations, but they weren't free after 1776 either, right? So they weren't celebrating at all. But when you have a conquered people, like here in Nicaragua, where they had been occupied for a long time and were fighting for their identity, fighting for their freedom, not just fighting for, well, a slightly different political organization, but actually fighting to be independent of a country that had come in and taken over an existing people. It would be equivalent to if the indigenous Indians in the United States came back and retook the United States and then got to celebrate that they had managed to retake what had always been theirs. That's how big the emotional response is here in Nicaragua, because this is a lot of people, a lot of population who remember being occupied and fought for many, many, many years to be free, and finally won that freedom back to be their own people again, to be self-governing again, to have it be their country again. And those people, many of those people are still alive. Many are not, but many are. And so you have, and even people who are my age, right? We have friends who are my age, they can remember when they were not free, when they were under the foreign regime. And they can remember being bombed in their neighborhoods and having to hide in bomb shelters to survive because residential neighborhoods were being bombed, right? Like that stuff is real memories of real people. Anyone who's my age or older, they actually remember this time. So this celebration of we're free, we're safe, we get to self-govern is a huge thing. I mean, absolutely enormous. The United States was just like, well, we are self-governing, we do get a vote, we do get all this stuff, but we don't get enough of a vote, or we don't get to gerrymander as much as we wanted to, or we don't like that we have to pay the same taxes as everyone else, we want to have more control. Like, that's fine, right? But the whole, like, it wasn't like they were occupied by a foreign force. They were occupied by a local force. They were the same people, right? They just wanted to separate two things in half. It's like if the United States today decided that everything east of the Mississippi was going to be one country and everything west of the Mississippi was going to be another country. Neither one of them was occupied by the other. It's just one big place that's separating in half. Could still be a big war, could still be a big celebration, could still be a big deal, but it's not the same. One is not occupying the other, and that's, the U.S. was not occupied by England. They were not the United States. It was all England at the time, and England split in half, and West England became the United States, and East England stayed with the name England. So here in Nicaragua, there's this unbelievable amount of having won their freedom, very hard fought, very against the odds, and that celebration is enormous. And so that is what's going on tomorrow, or tomorrow in my vlog timeline. So the celebration is big, and it goes on throughout the country at different times, because like a lot of wars, it isn't a sudden all at once thing. It isn't like, oh, you know what, it all ended today and now it's like this everywhere. It doesn't work that way. At least it especially didn't used to. Today, information moves around a lot faster. If you think about the War of 1812, some of the most famous battles, possibly the most famous battle of the war, the Battle of New Orleans, was not actually fought during the war. The United States had already won. It was already over. So the fact that it was a big victory for the U.S. is kind of a big joke, because the most famous general from the war got his biggest victory when the war wasn't even on. It's weird, right? But everything about Andrew Jackson is a little bit weird. So here, some cities like Leon were free like a week or two before the whole country was free. So tomorrow on the 19th is the day that officially the government that had been here occupying fell, and Nicaragua took over self-governing and began the republic. And so the current country of Nicaragua, right, is only 44 years old tomorrow. That's unbelievable from a, we think of, well, it's a really old place. Well, of course it's a really old place. Just like I grew up in New York, and that goes back to the early 1600s as a colony, but it goes back 1,000 years before that as the Iroquois Federation. I don't know how long the Federation goes back, but the Iroquois who lived there go way, way, way back. They had an established empire that had been well around for a long time, and that didn't just come out of nowhere. That came from a place that had been there before. So there were these cultures that were really old. That place is established, and in the United States, we wiped a lot of that away, right? Genocide, relocation, whatever. That's a very callous way to look at genocide, but at some point you kind of have to move on. But the wiping out of the original culture, there was this big reset, and we kind of view the world as, well, it only exists since the 1600s, but here in Nicaragua, that tradition goes way, way, way back. This is, you know, when you're looking at Nicaraguans and talk to Nicaraguans, these are generally, not always, but generally families who have been here for 1,000, 2,000 years. This zone has been occupied for a very long time. It predates things like the Mayan Empire, and of course the Mayans also predate the Mayan Empire. They were just the Mayan countryside at some point. And these areas have been long populated by the people who are still here, and the languages have not migrated that heavily. Some, of course, but not that heavily. And so Nahuatl has been spoken here for an outrageously long time. So when we look at it from some perspectives, it's like, well, the Nicaragua, who after whom is named Nicaragua, is this cultural region that stretches way, way, way back. And then colonially, if that is a word, there is this long tradition of New Spain, and then Mexico, and then the Central American Federation, and Nicaragua had an identity through all those pieces, pre-Columbian to post-colonial, and in the 1820s became an independent country for a little while, became a colony, again, gained its independence briefly, was occupied for a very long time, and it's only been 44 years since the current incarnation of Nicaragua, with the current borders and the current government and the current system of being free and being a republic, was founded. So in the same sense that the United States started in 1789 is the same sense that Nicaragua started in 1979. And so from an institutions perspective, from a experiential perspective, meaning the experiences of self-governance, the experiences of building a nation and a system of law and order, is all relatively young. And so even people you meet that may be in their 30s, for example, while they didn't grow up and witness the war, and while they didn't grow up and participate in the war for sure, and they don't remember being occupied, it's a little bit like being born in the US just after Vietnam, like I was. And to me, it was a thing that happened in the past, but it felt very prescient. It felt very important and weighty as a child, and it still does. And you can see Vietnam and its ramifications, even though it happened far away, but we were involved. That weight of that, the emotions of that, were still very strong all through my childhood, and you couldn't miss it. Well, here, the war happened many years after Vietnam, not a decade, but several years later, and was, took place right here. And the devastation of it still remains everywhere. You go into a museum and you say, why are there holes in the ceiling? Well, they didn't want to cover up where the bombs came through. And it's like, you're still seeing bridges that have been blown apart and roofs that are damaged and things. Yes, it's been 44 years, and yes, they could be fixed for the most part, but sometimes it just hasn't been gotten to, sometimes it isn't a priority, and sometimes it's a memorial. And of course, sometimes it becomes a tourist attraction, right? The same thing happened in Bosnia. We went there to Mostar a number of years ago, and maybe it's gone now, but they left bullet holes in everything, right? And at some point you're like, okay, I get it. Like, you want us, but this has become a tourist attraction to look at bullet holes instead of rebuilding the community, right? Whereas other parts, Sarajevo, for example, had rebuilt buildings that had been destroyed, and you had they had like one little spot that was a memorial. For the most part, everything was rebuilt, and it felt like a place where a war had never taken place. You couldn't imagine a war taking place in Sarajevo, except the name brings to many people such an idea of war. But in Mostar, everything was, oh, remember the war? Look, there's bullet holes everywhere. And you're like, why aren't you patching the walls? Come on. Like, at some point, fix it and move on. I get it. It makes the town was only known for that devastation. And so they're depending on that tourist traffic to pull in people. But it's in some ways you get a little bit of that here, but I think very little, because there's very little tourist attraction, right? There's very little tourist traffic, so that you can't really make money by doing that. And so things that are being left are mostly museums, and most things have been fixed, but that still exists. We still witness things, say, why is this like this? And like, well, that was a bomb, or that was a crash, or this is where a plane came down, or whatever. And you're like, you're living in the midst of it all the time. In the United States, we never live in the midst of things that have happened like that, because nothing ever happens there. Yes, the revolution happened there. Yes, 1812 happened there, or the second revolution, depending on where you're from. But those are so long ago that the buildings from that are gone. And when you like live in New York City like I did, once in a while you'd end up in some really old building. You'd be like, oh, some famous event happened in this place. You're like, wow, this building was here when that happened. But I grew up in Western New York, which is still pretty close to the old colony zone, and there was nothing. There were no remnants of colonial times. There may be, the streets are laid out a little bit like that because of some colonial thing. A museum may have something from the colonial times, but essentially every building was built in the 1800s or later. Could be really early, 1802 kind of thing, but you're still looking at the 1800s, not the 1700s. And so that feeling of like living amongst it is more like, well, there's stories, but you can't really picture where it happened. You don't feel connected to it particularly. Sometimes it's like on this road or in this town. You're like, in this town? Really? But here, because it was so recent, everybody remembers it. Everybody can be like, oh no, I remember when this happened, right? No, it was in that yard, right? That tree was a bit smaller, and you're like, oh my gosh, like it's a completely different thing. It's so tangible. Not just to you as a visitor, it's tangible to, when you live here, when you're from here, you grow up with historic markers everywhere. This is where this person who died was born. This is where this battle took place. This is a statue to the person who did this. And the same thing in Costa Rica. Like everything is so recent that things are named after people who should still be alive today, or would have, their kids would be around, and they've been gone, and neighborhoods are named after them, and streets and bridges and those kinds of things. And so you feel this really, really strong connection. So all of that, right, is to give some context to the fact that tonight is the Vigil, or the Vigilia, I think that's right. And sometimes there's new words in Spanish, and I'm like, I'm not sure how this is supposed to be enunciated exactly. And so what they do is, it's been going on for days, right? There's all kinds of events going on, all kinds of partying, but I have to work. I can't just go hang out in Managua. So there's been stuff going on around the country, and I showed you the week of the León stuff going on a few weeks ago. And tonight, what they do is you go into Managua, and they set up all over the city for this vigil. And it's literally called the Vigil because people stay up all night to kind of party. And it's very party, right? Bands are playing. There are people everywhere selling food and desserts and toys and stuff. And they're just all over downtown Managua. And we got in pretty late, so I had to work all day and then drive. I didn't manage to get out there until 10 o'clock at night, and that was to get to the outskirts of Managua, leave the car, get a taxi, and go in, because you want to be able to go in and drink, because it's Nicaragua, it's what you do. And so we went into San Antonio, neighborhood in downtown Managua, and went to the Parque there, and they had a big stage set up and a huge band, same one I showed a few weeks ago, LiberArte, here in León. They performed, and big crowds, and we hung out and had a really nice time, met a lot of people out there. I was so late that I missed a bunch of people that I wanted to see, but it was really cool. It was very cool getting to go out and see what the crowds are like, and see what the activities are like, and the bands, and just all of that. It was really interesting, and I stayed out until about 3:30 in the morning, which is not that you're expected to go till about 6 or 7. Like it is a vigil for real. They're like waiting for the liberation, which I'm kind of hypothesizing on this, but I imagine this is very much like the actual night of the 18th, 44 years ago, where they were waiting for news of the collapse of the occupying government in the morning to celebrate, because they had been freeing different parts of the country, and they're waiting for Managua to be free and officially have the occupying force go into exile. And so this vigil, to stay up waiting for the big celebration tomorrow, it's a neat thing, but it's basically just a big party. It's the same things you would expect if you did the 4th of July, but spread it out over a couple days. Go to a big party, eat lots of food, ride carnival rides, because of course there's carnival rides. There's always carnival rides going on in Nicaragua. They don't do like big displays, but they're always there. Like people like to get on the little roller coasters and do the little pirate boats things and stuff. And so we did that. We hung out very, very late at night, hooked up with some people that we knew, and hung out with them at a bar and watched the activities, and had a really nice night. It was very cool. It was pretty decently chill. The music is good. It was fun. Met up with a famous photographer in town who knows the channel, and we hung out for a little while, and we're there working together. That was very cool. And then we had a really good day. It was fun. And then I'm staying in Managua tonight, and then tomorrow I do have to work during the day, but there aren't a lot of events, as far as I can tell, happening during the day. Tomorrow night is the giant equivalent that we would do for like 4th of July, where they have the big official events that they broadcast on TV, and they have official events all over the country, and giant fireworks and all that kind of stuff. That's tomorrow. Tonight is a vigil to get ready for tomorrow. So that's what we're doing today. Tomorrow I'm going to be in Managua, so there should be even more footage of what we do and the stuff going on down there, because I really do want to bring you guys a little bit of like what happens in Nicaragua. And this is important. This is one of those events that in years past we've been told, you know, you're a foreigner, you probably shouldn't be seen at these things, not because you aren't welcome, but because, you know, they're very rough, they can be dangerous, you definitely stand out. And we've learned a lot of, while people are often well-meaning, I think, a lot of that stuff is just, it's hooey, to be honest. Like, everyone thinks that all these things are going to be dangerous, and then you go there and you're like, this is the farthest thing from dangerous. Now, it is worth noting, these are big crowds, and it is mayhem, and it is loud, so if you're worried about getting like pickpocketed or something, absolutely, right? Carrying the camera, I had to be watching, there's people everywhere. I didn't see anyone doing anything untoward, but huge crowds, massive opportunity, people drunk everywhere, right? Because you can drink in public here, open container, not a problem. Like, so this is just huge public spaces full of people drinking and partying and reveling, and really a fun time. But I would not carry wads of cash with me. I would not carry super amounts of valuable things. I wouldn't put on all my jewelry and go hang out, right? Put on some shorts, throw on a t-shirt, be prepared to have people spill beer on you, put on some sneakers, carry enough money to get through the night. Pay attention, don't carry a GoPro out at arm's length. I mean, I do, but don't. Right? Be reasonable, and you know, be smart, and it's not a problem at all. And there's nothing like dangerous. It's pickpocketing that you're worried about, but that's not how people portray it. They're always like, it's so dangerous. And my group kept saying, I would go someplace to film, they'd be like, wait, you mean you're going alone? I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, there's kids everywhere, families out, like, there's nothing, it's fine. Absolutely feel that you can go to these events. Don't let people give you this impression that this stuff is not places you should go. Yes, downtown Managua, giant drunk crowds, be more cautious than normal. But same in the U.S., you can't go to any big place like this in the U.S. with a bunch of drunk people in public, first of all, because you're not allowed to. But if you did, you know, it would be dangerous, but not dangerous. Just put on your thinking cap, use some common sense, and you'll be fine. So I wanted to point that out, because this is specifically in years past. Every year we get all the expats are like, we don't go out tonight, we don't go to restaurants, we don't do anything for these 2 days because there's just all this stuff going on and you just don't want to be seen. And we're always like, really? I don't sense that, but okay. I mean, they've been here longer than us, they must know. No, it's just one of those myths that gets repeated. Absolutely safe, very fun. If you're gonna be in the city and you're willing to go be in huge drunk crowds, right? Get some beers, get some quesadillas, get some, you know, grilled meat off the grill, get candied apples, have a good time, eat your elote, make a mess, probably get sick and throw up, probably have to pee in an alleyway because there aren't enough bathrooms, and have a good time, enjoy the concert. Everything is free, not the food. The people selling things is not free, but like all kinds of free stuff. Bring a couple bucks to ride on the rides, eat way too much, go on the pirate boat and throw up. Like, have a good time. That's what it's about. Celebrate with everyone. Don't be afraid to go out and do these things, whether it's here or anywhere, right? These are big public events for families to go out and enjoy and be families. That's exactly what's going on. It was fun. I'm glad I did it, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow. And I hope you guys come along with me. If you want to help support the channel, hit that link up above. You can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. That helps fund everything we do on this channel. Thank you so much to everyone who helps make this possible. And of course, if you need assistance, info@relocatenicaragua.com. I'll just throw that up there as well. Take a moment to like, subscribe, tell your friends, grab the link from the show, go on to, you know, your Reddits, your Twitters, your Facebooks, and just post the episode. Let people know you've been watching this and you think it's interesting and maybe they should check it out too. Tell your friends, and I will see all of you from Managua tomorrow.
Hey!
See?
¡Viva Sandino! ¡Viva! ¡Viva el Frente Sandinista! ¡Viva! ¡Viva los héroes! ¡Viva! ¡Viva los cachorros! ¡Viva! ¡Viva la nueva generación! ¡Viva!